Minister, Victoria Ratkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I first of all echo the Secretary of State's comments and remembrance of her dear colleague Jo Cox. Her loss was felt across the House and across party political lines, and I send all of our very best wishes to her loved ones and her friends. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for advance sight of this statement and for briefing call on this announcement. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, as you know, I've been trying for months to coax the Secretary of State to the dispatch box to explain major events within her portfolio, from their EU handover negotiations to their lack of support for farmers. And finally, she emerges into the light. We all assumed that it would be to announce progress towards resolving the many issues facing Thames Water and their customers. Instead, it is a statement about a letter to the regulator. Now, there is nothing new in this statement. There is no change in the situation of Thames Water, and still no certainty for bill payers. Thames Water has repeatedly failed its customers and the environment with a record of pollution, leakage and chronic underinvestment. The latest figures lay this bare. The company is responsible for around a third of the nation's worst pollution incidents, even as bill payers face steep increases in their bills. And these are not abstract failures. Untreated sewage has been poured into the rivers and chalk streams that local communities cherish, while customers are asked to pay more for less. The priority now must be a financial arrangement that keeps the company afloat and protects bill payers and taxpayers. Now, whilst her government is in chaos, paralysed by the Prime Minister's weakness and the Mayor of Manchester's leadership ambitions, Thames Water continues to fail. If no deal is reached, Thames Water could collapse, again at enormous cost to taxpayers. The Secretary of State has said she does not want a scenario where customers pick up the bill for the company's failures. But when the Conservatives tried to amend the Water Special Measures Act to prevent consumers being on the hook in the event of a company going into special administration and tried to impose a lending ratio limit on water companies to prevent this situation happening again, Labour voted it down. Why? I also remember when, under the former Secretary of State, an investor pulled out of a previous rescue deal, partly due to political risk. In other words, he had talked himself out of a deal. How is the current Secretary of State avoiding the failures of the now Secretary of State for Housing? And there are those who are urging nationalisation, a word thrown around carelessly. In fact, I think I've heard it just now, by Labour backbenchers and by Reform. None of them explain that nationalisation would be extremely costly to the taxpayer, potentially up to £20 billion, which is equivalent, to those who are wondering what that means, it's roughly equivalent to the defence funding shortfall about which we have heard so much in recent days. But there are reasonable concerns about how Thames Water's failures will be managed during the government's restructuring of the sector and the abolition of Ofwat. So please, can the Secretary of State confirm that there will be no downgrade or dilution to the existing penalty regime which has been briefed out into the newspapers? Can she set out what safeguards Thames Water will be taken to ensure that Thames Water remains fully responsible for its environmental and operational failures? How will the government ensure bill payers are not left bearing the cost of past mismanagement? And has the government offered or begun any process to recommend an alternative deal? Public trust in the water industry is already at rock bottom. Ministers have still not explained how investment in the sector will actually be paid for. Indeed, the Secretary of State's predecessor had to admit that the so-called private water industry investment, which I see the Secretary of State's repeated today, is in reality paid for by higher bills. Families already struggling with the cost of living should not become the safety net for a company that rewarded its executives whilst letting its infrastructure crumble. This is an important moment for the government to show that it can balance financial stability with strong regulatory oversight and to put accountability and the interests of bill payers and the environment at the heart of water reform. The government must now deliver on the big promises they made during the election for the water sector.